Welcome back to the Data Driven Real Estate Podcast, the podcast for real estate professionals dedicated to driving business using data. I'm Aaron Norris, and along with co-host Sean O'Toole, CEO of Property Radar, this is episode 26, and we get to interview Fred. Fred is housed within the St. Louis Federal Reserve, and we are very excited to interview as we've been longtime users and huge fans for a number of years. This week, we've got Iveta Fortova. She is the manager at Fred and Fred family of products, including Alfred and GeoFred, which I didn't even know existed until this interview. We also have Maria Arias, who works on the Fred team developing and maintaining the data update process. The data process on hundreds of thousands of different data series. We cover everything on what that's like and the different data sets that are available, how they inspire everybody from a kindergartner to a PhD, how to explore the data and make sense of it and release their own research, and how you can even become a forecaster and get worldwide recognition. You won't want to miss this week. So, hey, Maria and Iveta, we really appreciate you being here today. And I guess the question I want to start with is, why data? What keeps you excited about this industry? What do you love?
Hello, Aaron. Delighted to be here. Just before we start, we would like to say that the views expressed here are the views of our own and not the views of the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis or the Federal Reserve System. But data is very exciting to us. And we work on a Fred team, which is a team specializing in the dissemination of Federal Reserve economic data. And really, data is very unique because we really like the fact that our website can deliver data service to users. And data can mean stories, because when you look at data, you can see trends in data. You can see when the data goes ups and downs, and that always comes with an interesting story.
Agreed.
I've been a long time Fred user, probably since it first launched. When did it first launch?
Yeah, that's a really interesting story, actually. Officially on the web, Fred launched in 1991. But
Okay.
The idea of Fred actually started in the early 60s. So the research director at the time, his name was Homer Jones. He wanted to share some monetary data with other policymakers, but also with the general public. And so he started disseminating a memo that contained these 3 data tables. And so for a long time, it was just like a memo that was updated. Of course, like once people received it, they wanted to keep receiving it with an updated value every month or every week, however often this was. And eventually in the early 90s, Fred became a dial-up bulletin board, and it's just grown from there.
Wow. Okay. So I am not nearly as early as I thought I was on that.
And when you say grown, can you describe sort of the vast amounts of data in your library?
Yes, Fred has definitely grown exponentially. We've, as Maria said, in 1991, when Fred first started, we had about 30 time series. And when you talk about time series, think about unemployment rate or gross domestic product. Those are the type of time series that were available. And then we've really, with technologies and with a lot of automations, in 2013, we reached our milestone with 100,000 series, and today we are almost at an 800,000 time series that we continuously maintain and update in Fred.
Just again, I want to keep help orient our readers, right? So this is basically a service of the St. Louis Federal Reserve, right? That makes that available, and it's at Fred.St. Louis. Tell us where people go to access this if they haven't before.
Yeah, Fred is a data aggregator, which means that we get data from public websites like government institutions, international organizations, and then some private institutions and academic resources. And we keep that up to date in our website. And so the way that this works is we're putting all of this data in one place for users to be able to combine and compare different time series from different sources. So for example, if you want to compare employment growth and economic growth using payroll employment and the gross domestic product, those are both of those series are produced by different government agencies, the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Bureau of Economic Analysis. But in FRED, without leaving our website, you can plot both of those in a graph very quickly and then compare them immediately. And again, for everyone who has not visited FRED yet, it's at fred.stlouisfed.org.
Perfect. Yeah, that's great. One of the other things that's, really impressive to me about it, and it's not, I won't say it's perfect, right? Like, so, and maybe you could talk about this, but you're getting this data from all these different sources, right? And now you're going to lay it on a chart and compare it. And that presents, as a data guy, that presents some real challenges, right? Are you getting the same time slices, quarterly versus monthly versus annually? And how much of your work goes into just getting these things to align so that they work on a chart together?
So over years, we developed a process where the notion of the time series is well defined in our backend. And really, it's all dependent on the frequency of the data. So you can have data like interest rates, treasury interest rates, who are published with a daily cadence, and the data is on a daily frequency. And then you can have data like labor markets, which are published by Bureau of Labor Statistics, and those data are monthly. And really, when all of this gets put together on our website, users can combine these data together on a graph. And there is a kind of like a magic in the bag that happens that is able to translate that this data, while it's the treasury data, while it's daily, and the labor data, which is monthly, can end up on one graph. And we have a highly interactive graphs, so users can see the values and download the data from the graph. And really, that is what makes FRED very unique, is the fact that we are trying to provide this data service to public and recognize the value in being able to give up-to-date information to our users.
Right, and just to add a little bit onto that, some of our tools that we provide as well is, while you can add multiple series to the graph, you can also edit the graph right then and there. So for example, if you want to compare, like you mentioned, quarterly and monthly data, you can convert the monthly data to a quarterly frequency as well. And so that's all, the calculations are all done in the background, and then you can pick if you want like an average for those monthly values converted to a quarterly frequency, or if you want a different type of aggregation, things like that. So it can really allow you to create customized graphs for whatever your needs are or whatever data you're interested in.
How did this line at the St. Louis Federal Reserve? Are the other banks doing something similar, or they're just like, St. Louis has got this?
So FRED originated in St. Louis, and we are part of a research department. And as Maria kind of alluded, that really in the 60s, the big vision for Homer Jones, who was a research director at that time, he really liked the vision of allowing data to be available to public. And really, this product has since been organically evolving over years with multiple other side products and creating this FRED family of products. So FRED is the mainstream of the data, but then we have a mappable data in a GeoFRED, and then we have also real-time data in ALFRED. So we are really trying to capture as much pieces and angles of looking at the data as possible.
Somehow I completely missed GeoFRED. Like, I've been a FRED user for, I can't tell you how many presentations of mine have at least one FRED chart in it, if not quite a few. So, but I completely missed GeoFRED. I just found it this morning, and I only got a chance to play with it after Aaron mentioned it. And so I don't know how I possibly missed that. How long has that one been around?
Quite a bit. And what GeoFred is just a way for users to see cross-sectional comparisons. So it's just a way of looking at the data on a map. So when comparing the states in the US, for example, and you're right that it was developed on a site, and maybe it was not as well provided to our users, but we have been trying to, over the years, incorporate the maps on the FRED website in a better way. So nowadays, if users would be able to see View Map button next to their graphs, that's an indication that they can also examine and analyze the data on a map. And in addition, we also provide globes, images of globes below the graph in the related content section, where users can also see data in GeoFred.
Got it. Okay.
Visualization.
I was trying to do, oh, sorry, Aaron, you go ahead.
Visualizations are just very powerful, so I have a lot of playing to do. I too have been a long-term user of FRED, and as pulling together different data from different governmental agencies has been very tricky. And then I found FRED, and it was a godsend. I can't tell you how much time you guys have saved me over the years. Sean,
we're fanboys, just to be clear. So yeah, we're definitely your fanboys.
Sean, I already asked Maria, I'm like, where can we get those sweatshirts?
Yeah, I know. I totally want one.
Yeah, the FRED swag is available at the St. Louis Fed's The Economy Museum. Unfortunately, it's closed right now, but as soon as it opened, we're expecting to have an inflood of FRED fans coming to get some FRED swag.
I love it. How big is your team? Like when you're dealing with 800,000 time series, what kind of manpower does that take?
Our team is relatively small. We have a team of about 10 people, and they consist of the developers who are working on making sure our website functions properly and developing new features and new tools to FRED. And then the other part of our team are data engineers who specialize in making sure our data and content in FRED is up to date. And because FRED is so popular, we also have a lot of help outside of our team within the research department to help us with other things related to data and content.
Do you have any idea how many users are on your site any specific time of year?
Yes, our users fluctuate, and we have kind of like a seasonality in our users, and that is correlated a lot with education and semesters at schools, because one of our core users are academia professors and students who utilize our product to learn about economy, money, and banking. FRED is in the textbooks for students to learn about data and do homework. But overall, we do have over millions of users annually that come to our sites from many countries and are hungry for data and for information about data and graphs.
Yeah, and something that we think is really cool about FRED users is at any point in time, we could have a person who is just now learning about economics. It's their first time looking at a graph, as well as a PhD economist or even a Nobel Prize winning economist on the website. So again, we try to make sure that our features are easy to use, the data is accessible for everyone to learn about, but also that we have tools that more advanced users can take advantage of, and also, like everyone in between. So we're, again, really happy to hear when people really like our product, and we try to keep developing new features for you guys out there who are using it to collect the different data that you need.
I personally think it should be, there should be a whole class on it in high school, maybe elementary school, right? Like for every person before they're allowed to graduate, before they're allowed to vote, like they should know how to use Fred. Like it would clean up half the crazy ideas that I see on Facebook and Twitter, and all the wrong-headed ideas out there. Because it's just such, you can ask these questions rather than, guess about them, and it's really an amazing resource.
Right. Even taking one step back, one of our core missions is to promote data literacy. And that's something that is very important to us. So just going back to understanding, what is the frequency of this data? What are the units? How can you compare two different series? They have to be in the same units in order for you to compare apples to apples and not apples to oranges. So we work very closely with another group in the research department that is the economic education group, and they create a lot of different materials from kindergarten all the way to high school and college level educational resources for students out there, and teaching assistant teaching materials as well.
Really?
Oh, that's amazing. I didn't know that. That's great to hear.
I'm gonna have to find links to that. That sounds really cool. Kindergarten?
Yes, down to kindergarten. There are some, actually, there are stories that are read out loud. And so you could just sit your kid in front of a tablet and play this story that teaches them a lesson about finance or education or economics, things like that. And you can find all of those resources at econlowdown.org.
I might have to start with that kindergarten one for my 18-year-old.
And build your way up. That's amazing.
Build his way up, yes. He's actually pretty good. He's had to put up with me as his dad, so he's not that bad.
Yeah, somehow I don't think he's gotten away with scot-free for sure. No,
yeah.
Maria, you have to deal with a lot on the back end, and I really want people to appreciate what it means on the data side. So what does your day-to-day look like when data is coming into the system? How does that work?
Right, so for our process currently, a lot of it is automated. And so we have developed a Python-based pipeline where when the data comes out, we reach out to the source's website, collect that data, and process it and save it onto our database. And at that point, it's available immediately on our website. But we have a set of like notifications and things like that throughout the day with these processes, making sure that everything is the data is updating successfully, and if there are issues, we would go in and check each like specific data set or release to see what is happening. And then this is kind of for like maybe 90% of our data is updated in an automated way. And then we also, for some, like for the remainder of that, we either manually have to go and check to see if the data has updated on the source's website, or maybe we wait to receive an email from a subscription that the data is available, things like that. So there are a few kind of outliers out there that involve some sort of manual intervention to get the data updated. But kind of even before we get to that step, as we add new data to Fred, we have to add them to this data pipeline. So that involves us as data engineers understanding the data and how the data is provided by the particular source or the particular data set that we're adding, so that we can process that data and kind of standardize the data so that we can save it to our database.
Who decides what data gets to be featured in the app?
So for us, we have a long list of data requests that comes from various places, our users, the data providers themselves, who would like their data added to Fred. And as we mentioned, our team is relatively lean. So what we do is we have internally have a committee that meets on a regular basis, and then we select data that we think are relevant to our users, and they are reliable as well from the originating sources, so that we can continuously provide new content to users, and we can give our users additional data to work with. So for example, recently we have added weekly pandemic unemployment claims, which has been developed by Department of Labor. And we have also worked on addition of housing data from Optimal Blue and Realtor.com, which are also available on our website. So anybody who's interested can go and find them.
I saw one on GeoFred. It was market hotness.
Yes,
It seemed to be real estate related.
yes, that is a data set from Realtor.com as well. They have a set of indicators that they define as market hotness indicators. So it's different topics that kind of like how many days a house has been, or like average of how many days houses have been on the market in this region, things like that. And so that's a data set that they put together and we publish in FRED.
On GeoFred, it had very few counties populated from what I saw yet. Is that still just a work in progress? Is that the reason, or did they just not have data on most of the country, or do you know any ideas there?
Yeah, so that's, we have their complete data set in FRED for the market hotness data. They have only the largest, I don't know how many, I think it's the largest, like 100 MSAs. And then I think the counties that are included in that data set are from those MSAs and surrounding areas as well. So it's not a county by county for the US for this particular data set. But we do
and I happened to pull down county. If I pulled down MSA, it probably would have filled in a little nicer for those MSAs too, versus county. Right. It's like only when the MSA maps to the county would it work, right?
So yeah, it would depend on what data they have available for that particular data set. And yeah, I know that for that one in particular, it's just the a certain number of the largest MSAs and then those surrounding counties.
We have a lot of data users, and I want to come back to your data pipeline, right? So for that data pipeline is, I've used obviously the website and the graphical tools, right? The folks that want to get access to raw data, is your data pipeline open source? Do you guys have an API to the raw data? Is there any options there? Or they've got to go do all the same hard work you did?
Right, so the work that we do hopefully will make everyone else's work a lot easier. We are doing the hard work of going to, the census and the BLS and all of these other organizations and parsing their data that is provided in different formats and putting it all in like one standardized format in FRED. And so for all of you who want to maybe automate your workflows or things like that, we also have, we have a FRED API, and we also have an add-in for Excel that you could use. So that allows you to, again, automate your workflows in different ways and combine it with the other data that you already have. So if you like programming for the API in particular, you just have to create a free user account and request an API key. And there are third-party kind of wrappers or packages that are already out there that other people have created, and they just kind of wrap around the FRED API and make it easier to use. And then that's in addition to, if you go to the FRED website, you can download the data as a CSV or an Excel file. And even if you've added multiple lines to the graph, if you download the data from that graph, it'll include all of the data that you have. So that's also another way that you could access the raw data.
I've done all the above. Love it.
Awesome. And then, yeah, for the GeoFred data as well, if you want to download all of the, say, like all of the county level data for the entire US, that's probably the best way to download all of that data is through GeoFred for that particular map.
And all the data itself, basically, at least as provided from you, is open source and people can use it in their applications and that kind of stuff. Are there license limitations at all?
So most of the data we have come from governmental sources or international organizations. And
largely
they are
public record.
Public domain data, correct? But we do have small percentage of data that comes with copyrights. And users will be able to identify those data because we have a node under the graph that specifies what the copyright restrictions are. And we also have in a notes what that means to the end user, and if they need any additional actions to utilize the data. But overall, from the whole scheme of data we have in FRED, it's a small percentage of data.
I liked, Iveta, what you said about data telling stories. And part of that is, what I like about data is there's a trust factor to it. It's just the data. The data is the data. Data doesn't get political. It tells a story. How important is the data vetting process when you consider new partners? I had no idea that you were pulling in like a National Association of Realtors, which is an association group. What does that data vetting cycle look like?
When we are looking on what kind of sources the data come from, we are looking on how much data would be available to us, and also how what the data look like, how is the data constructed. If it's data that is academic data, we are looking for ways to see whether there is some peer review work or paper that has been published for construction of the data. And also if there are ways that this data, how is the data disseminated, and also in what way we as a team can maintain the data, which is also a big piece, because we are trying to look for ways on getting the data in an automated way, and cut down on the manual work. So there are pieces of that, and obviously it also comes down with private sources to having proper licensing agreements in place.
I know you've been on the research team before, so do the data sources come in and then your research team gets a list of all the new data sources and they dream up what's next? What triggers some of the research that your team does?
So within our team, we do our team does not do research. We are just solely breathing and living from FRED.
Yeah.
But the economists who are in the research department, they pretty much have really choice in whatever they would like to publish and write about. And their process, I'm not familiar with their process in details, but
that's okay. I was just curious. Yeah. Like, I can't imagine having access to 800,000 data series and you just wake up in the morning like, what combination am I going to put together today? That's amazing. So
do either of you have any favorite data series?
It's hard to pick with so many of them. But I do have.
You can't wait to look at in the morning, or when the new drop comes, that like, ooh, that's the one I want to see.
We definitely become kind of a data nerds over the years, working with data, and there are some data are definitely interesting to talk about. For example, we do have data in FRED that is the longest series that we publish, and it's a historical data for population of England that goes back to 1086. So it's really depicting a plague that impacted population. And then we have some really interesting data on odors of sinks, kitchen sinks, and toilets during industrialization period, and the peak in indoor plumbing that has happened during that time. So really, those are our kind of like nice to mentions, but really when it comes to favorites, it changes all the time, because data is really interesting when there are trends and when there are changes in the data, as you alluded to the spikes and drops in data. So really looking at business cycles and seeing how the data changes with the business cycles or after the business cycles is, I think, the most interesting part of looking and analyzing the data.
Data is such a hard business too, and I'm sure as you've made more available, a lot of people are very demanding. I think one of my favorite series has always been migration, and especially with COVID, there's been a lot of talk in the real estate space and different data series to track not having to wait for a census. Are you guys getting a lot of pressure to provide more series that are a lot more timely instead of waiting for government census and things of that nature?
We've seen a lot more demand for more, not only more timely series, but also data that are more frequent or that have like a higher frequency. So say daily or weekly data instead of like quarterly or annual data. And so especially this year when, if you think about GDP and the state of the economy, you have to wait for the quarter to be finished and then one more month for the initial release of the previous quarter's GDP to come out, right? And as like things are changing in the country, it's hard to tell what the state of the economy is at that point. So we've definitely seen an increase in demand. Unfortunately, we're also kind of bound by, we want to continue to provide high quality data to users, and we can't just add everything right away either. And so it's been kind of trying to see what the data providers are creating for like new releases. For example, the census created a experimental data set from their quarterly business formation data. They started calculating weekly business formation data. And as soon as they started making that available, we added that to FRED in the summer or early summer, late spring, something like that. And so now there's this weekly level business formation statistics that has been really, really popular.
What's the geogranularity on that?
That is available at the state level. I'm not sure if it's also available at the MSA level.
It's so funny, Sean. We were just talking about that with Doug Duncan.
Doug Duncan, chief economist for Fannie Mae, was just saying that's the one data set he would most like to have right now, but really probably more down at the county or MSA level. Well, I'm going to have to dive into that one for sure, and we'll have to share it with Doug as well. Yeah. So out of you mentioned 800,000 time series. Like, give us some idea. A guess is fine, but like, what's the fastest data set you're getting? You're not like a Bloomberg terminal where it's sub-second updates on stocks or anything like that. But the fastest is maybe daily, hourly, and then the worst is annual, or is some of them even less often than that?
Are you referring to how quickly we can get the data to FRED, or what kind of data we have?
Well, I think there's two separate questions there, and let's do both. Let's do the first one is how often, right? So out of your 800,000, how many of those are annual versus quarterly versus monthly versus daily versus hourly, right? Just a guess. And then she mentioned, Maria mentioned the some of these things have a month delay. And so both of those things are really interesting issues, right? Like that I don't think people think enough about. We have to think about it a lot because we provide public records data on real estate, right? And in a small county, we might go get the data every other month, right? And in LA County, which is the largest in the United States, right, we have stuff, very, very quickly. So we get it daily. And, we usually have it published to our site within just a couple of days versus Alpine County might get it every 2 months, still published to our site within a couple of days, but there's big differences there. So can you speak to that kind of distribution among your data sets?
The data we have in FRED are anywhere from daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, semi-annual, annual, and then we have some 5-year frequency data. And really the distribution among what kind of data we have in FRED is more or less, we have most data on annual frequency, and then it goes down from annual to quarterly, monthly, and daily. So that is kind of like the distribution of the data we have in FRED. But then there are also aspects of how the data updates. So when we do our updates, let's say that employment data, the employment situation that is published by Bureau of Labor Statistics is published on the first Friday of every month, and it comes out around 7:30 Central Time. So we really are trying to hit the update process immediately or minutes after the data is released. And then obviously it depends on the size of the data itself. So if employment situation has a couple thousand series, it takes some time to get all the new information into FRED. But we are trying to optimize our process to really get into within minutes or from what the actual release of the data happens. And then there are also aspects of the data itself. So when the data is released, there is the lack of the information, because what happens is first Friday of the month, there is a publication of the data, but actually the data that's published represents the values for the previous month. And that goes all the way back down to the originating agencies who are working on obtaining the underlying data and perhaps the micro data. So they need time to get a good size sample of the data, which then allows them to model the data and make the aggregated values available. So those, in most data, if we have in FRED, work on this typical lag where you're not going to see data for December, monthly data for December, if the December isn't over yet. And again, it comes back down to the originating agencies having time to prepare those estimates. On the other hand, we also have a little bit of advanced data or data that is forecasting, that are looking into the future, which users can also use to look at what the data will look like. And last but least, because all of this process of disseminating those data and publishing data is really based on a lot of times on surveys and on incomplete samples. That's why agencies over time, as they're publishing new values, new monthly data, let's say, they are also going back and revising existing data. And for that reason, we also have ALFRED, which is an archival FRED.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, no, and that was ALFRED was another one I wasn't familiar with, and Aaron mentioned this morning when we were doing our pregame, prep, and he mentioned that he had a data series that changed quite dramatically, on one of the things that he was following, and he was able to find the historical data on ALFRED and see why see that difference. So that's pretty cool, that the archival piece too, valuable.
Yes, I think the best example that we like to give is from with gross domestic product. So if you think about gross domestic product, the data itself is a quarterly frequency data, but then the values are annualized, and then the data updates monthly. And then the values could revise every month, and on top of that, there is an annual revision that happens every year in summer, and on top of that, every 3 to 5 years, there is a benchmark revision, which may change everything under the GDP.
I did not know that. Wow.
The GDP doesn't mean anything. It's just a random guess. Just kidding.
Do you find that your work has inspired states to get a little bit more serious about collecting data? I noticed just in California as an example, in the last year, I've noticed a lot of data collection, sort of budget line items in legislation talking about digitizing and starting to track things. And can you point to some of your work being so helpful that states are like, we got to up our data game?
We would like to think that we inspire other government and public institutions to improve their data collection. In some cases where, especially like smaller government institutions have reached out to us about, having their data in FRED and it's not necessarily available in a machine readable form, we've been able to work with them, and even some of the academic data that we've added that seems to be pretty popular in FRED. We've been able to work with them to help them make their data available on their website in a easier form for us to parse, but also for other people. So like machine readable forms, standardized tables, things like that. And so we have seen a little bit of that, but we don't work with every government institution out there that we collect the data from, because again, all of this data is publicly available. So we just collect it from their website. But we would really hope that more and more, especially smaller government entities, to collect their data and make their data publicly available in an easy format, because it's not only for us to provide a service for other users, but also everyone around them and in your communities. You know what's important to your community, and what industries are what drive the community forward, things like that. And so if the local governments were able to help collect that data and make that data more available, it would be easier to also analyze the state of the economy in these kind of smaller geographical regions like you were talking about earlier. It's really nice to have county level data. It would be even nicer to have it at a smaller geographical level for everyone who's doing research and trying to understand what's happening.
Our company, the one that sponsors the data-driven real estate podcast, Property Radar, really only exists because of how difficult it is to get public records data on real estate, assessor's data, recorder data, et cetera. And it would make me so happy to shut this company down because the data was directly available on an easier format. Like, out of all the things that we spend money on as a government, you hear $1 billion here, $1 billion there, like why your group and the groups at all these different levels aren't funded to the tunes of billions of dollars. I have to say I was a little dismayed to hear how small your team was, and kudos for what you guys accomplished with that team. But if you ever need somebody to write a letter on why you should get more funding, you can count me in.
Yeah, the actionable side of data, I serve on the county board for 211 out here, and a lot of counties will do a
What is 211, Aaron?
Oh, sorry, 211 is a health and human services hotline. It's nationwide. It's sort of like the 411 for help. It has a lot of nonprofit data, government assistance programs. And I think why I joined was the data, is that you don't have to wait a year to spend $100,000 on what people need in the community. This 211 hotline is tracking the need. So 30% of the need in our community for the last 3 years has been consistently housing. You don't need to spend $100,000 and wait a year. It's almost immediate. So data does tell a story, and sometimes it's really important because government entities can redirect resources where it's needed instead of wasting time, and you're a year late. So I'm just curious, what are some of the data that you're most excited about in the last few years that you've seen cross your desk that you wish people knew about?
So since
800,000, we may have stumped them. There's too many.
I'm just trying to think of what we've added this year. Something that we did add this year, and it's real estate related, so I definitely wanted to bring it up, is the Optimal Blue mortgage market indices. So they have mortgage data that is broken down by different FICO scores and by different types of loans. So that's again, another private institution that reached out to us to have their data added to FRED, and it was added this year. But then we also have some other, like Yvette mentioned, the weekly pandemic claims data. That was a really interesting one. We also added daily FOMC target rates that were digitized by one of our economists at the St. Louis Fed and some of his co-authors going back to the early 1900s. So now you can get like FOMC target rates starting 1900s and then like slowly put the time series together up until present day. And then what else? Oh, there's another one by a group of economists as well. And then this is going back to kind of some of the changes that we've seen this year of more demand for high frequency data. Is a group of economists created the weekly economic index by last names of Lewis, Mertens, and Stock. And this is a kind of like a nowcast, but not necessarily a nowcast per se, but they combine several high frequency data that are available at the national level, and they create like a GDP forecast more or less at the weekly level. And that is actually updated twice in a week. And so that's been really interesting to see as well. And again, just kind of making kind of having like a more frequent update of state of the economy and keeping that conversation going.
Is it? I haven't looked yet. HMDA data. I know I have my mortgage license, and the amount of detail that the CFPB has mandated that we start collecting at the loan level is quite expansive. Is that available on FRED yet?
We do not have HMDA data in FRED.
Okay.
But I would say for anybody who's interested to learn about what data we have added to FRED, we would recommend to sign up for FRED newsletter, which is in the bottom of our web pages. And we let users know what new changes in data and what new data we added that way.
And new features as well.
Right there, that's my tip of the whole podcast, right? Like, because I've been a FRED user forever and I'm not signed up and I don't know why. So I'm signing up right now.
I'll make sure to post some extra links to make sure on the show notes that people can find this stuff really easy. So I think in the real estate space, there's a lot of like exploring different economies, and maybe some people, they've never approached FRED before. And so maybe we can give a little bit more industry specific. And I know this is your personal opinion. If you were going to explore a state that you didn't live in and you were interested in the economy, real estate, I don't know, what kind of things would you explore in FRED that people might not know exist?
So definitely for someone who is new to FRED, we would say to go and try to search for information and see what kind of data we have available for given states or MSAs or counties on the regional level. And they will quickly realize that we do have a lot of major economic indicators like labor data and gross domestic product, but then we also have data on property prices like house price indices, and we have rates on mortgage rates. So there's really a wealth of information available, and it's really matter for people to go and try it and see what we have, from housing stars and consumer price index to prices and wages. And it's kind of like when you go shopping and you feel like you really got a good bargain at the end of the day. So that's really what we are trying to give users with FRED.
Right. And then I would just add on to that if you find some graphs that you find really interesting or that you would like to come back to, this is just kind of a plug for some very useful FRED features. And especially if you don't have a FRED user account yet, right at the bottom of the graph, you can save graphs to your user account, but then you can also add graphs to a dashboard. So as you add graphs of, say, a similar topic that you are saving to your user account, you can also put all of those graphs or maps onto a dashboard and add other like snippets like notes or like a single number or something like that. And then all of these graphs can be saved so that they are updated automatically. So the next time the data comes out, you just go back to your dashboard or to your saved graph and the data is automatically updated for that. So this is a very useful feature that if you're not familiar with Fred or if you don't have a user account, I highly recommend you check out, especially again, if you have these kind of several graphs or indicators that you like to go back to. And then together with that, you can make your dashboards public and share them with your colleagues or share them with other people in the industry to just, again, simplify sharing data and sharing content.
Love it. You know, one thing I haven't looked at, and I'll just ask, is can you get like an embed code for those graphs so you can embed them in a website or whatever so that they're constantly updated on your site as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Just below the graph, there are some share links and account tools. So under the account tools, that's where you can save those to your account. But then the share links, you can share a URL to a graph. And so whatever modifications you've made to the graph and you share that using the URL provided under that button, the person who accesses that will see exactly the graph that you created. And then same with the embed code. We provide like a pre-created snippet that you could just put onto your website and embed it that way.
One of my, one of the things I really like is the bars that show recessions, right? Mm-hmm. And excuse me here if I don't know. In terms of those bars that kind of underlie, right? Recessions is that the only one, or are there some others?
We only have recessions at this point on the graphs, and there are other ways you can take those recessions off from the graph if there's no need for them. But we also have a way to manipulate the data within the graph itself. So, for example, if you have a data, you can then index the data to a different time of the year or different period in time, and it will set the values to 100 at a given period, and then you can see changes to the in the data. So that is also one way how someone can kind of take the data and make it work to whatever they are trying to save with the data.
I want to just expand on that a little bit to make sure our folks understand, right? So sometimes you get these data sets that are wildly different in their values, right? Instead, one way to do that in charts is to show one value on this side, one value on this side. But when you're looking at the relative change over time, you guys allow you to set a date at which you basically normalize them all. And then you can see how they change relative to each other from that, even if they have completely different scales. And that's a super useful tool. I got to say the one thing that I do a fair bit is underlie those events besides recessions, right? Like one of the things that folks in the real estate community worry about a lot is changes in administration and changes in the makeup, of the like the House and the Senate, right? So like everybody obviously is worried right now about this or thinking about this Senate race in Georgia. And so one of the most interesting ones I've done over the times is I go back and kind of like your recession bars, it's Republican versus Democratic president, right? And then a divided Congress versus, the same Congress. And is it all three or is it 1 and 2? Like that, like I would love some more of those, different things. That particular one, administration would be great, but I'd love to see some more like that because I do think that's a really, a really cool feature.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. So, and thank you for the suggestions. A suggestion we can look on what it will look like and how we can approach to have a better options for users, and then maybe have ways for displaying different administrations, as you said. And one more thing that I also wanted to add is that if it needs to be, users can draw lines on the graph as well. So there is a way to create user-defined lines. So that is probably the closest we can get you with the situations you are facing. But definitely, it's a place for improvement for us. So thank you.
It was eye-opening to me on what we think about in terms of which party's fiscally conservative and which one isn't. It was not what I expected.
And it's good to tell that story in data. It makes it less political. Well, maybe it doesn't, but if you're in real estate and you've never explored some of the tools, I really like the recession, because when you go into an area and you can see recession and how that local economy, unemployment, household income, median price really fared through like a recession. It's really interesting to drill down as you're sort of making moves, or you're helping clients that want to move out of state and they're exploring a new area. The easiest thing to do is go on the website and type in the name of a county and just start playing and see all the different data series that are available. It's almost overwhelming. Just have to get in there and explore it. Sean, do you have any other favorite ones that you use?
Oh, the biggest one I use the most often is I look at the different types of debt, right? So mortgage debt, corporate debt, total, the federal debt, et cetera. Student debt is just a student debt. That chart is really scary bad. Like, especially if you take all of those different types of debt and put them at 100, say in 2000, and look at how they change over time. We clearly have a huge student debt problem. And I know you guys probably can't comment on those things, but that's probably one of my favorites that I look at the most.
Well, we are about out of time. I'm trying to think if there's any other things that we should cover, like maybe new features that you're working on that you could share.
So we are working on surprises for 2021. Next year, Fred is going to be 30 years old. So we are going to be looking in some ways how we can make Fred more mature looking. But there are definitely going to be more data added throughout next year. That comes, that we try to do that on a regular basis, so that we don't lose interest in you guys. and other aspects we are going to try to look at is we would like to improve our search abilities in Fred, and we are looking into ways how we can expand on providing users with some industry breakdown on the data.
Sort of categorize things in buckets or something?
I would love, with 800,000, this is a big ask, but like a little deeper descriptions on each one, because a lot of times you'll see you'll type something in that you're interested in, inflation or whatever, and there's 30 or 40 time series, and you're like, oh my gosh, which one of these do I use? I just wanted this simple thing, and that piece, the number of series can sometimes get a little overwhelming in terms of which one should I use. So yeah, any suggestions there on how best to parse that when you get, and you're like, oh my gosh, there's 30 ways to look at mortgage debt, or, whatever, like any suggestions there on how people can get to the right one and not make bad decisions?
One of the things we try to do in our search is to really work the most popular and relevant series to the top of the search results. So for novice users, that may be an easy way to know that based on their search, that the series at the top are going to be the best to use. And also, we try to provide additional filtering options on the side of the data, and to subset the searches. But if all else fails, we really, and there's really not a good description in the data, we really try to ask users to see if they will be able to go back to the originating source and see if they have some other descriptions to make the decision of which series is better.
I do that a lot. I go and it's, you know, it's an amazing chance to learn, right? Because you see, oh, there's these different ways of looking at it. And so then I'll take the time to go research those different ways, and I come out smarter at the end of the day. So it's not all bad, the approach you take, and Google's your friend on that, right? And Wikipedia and those things for sure. So great.
Right, and part of the filtering options as well is if you can filter by source. And so if you know you want, say, inflation or consumer prices by a particular source, you can filter by source, and that would sometimes help you find the right one or close to what you're looking for.
What else did we not cover that you guys would like to share or mention before we wrap up?
I would say for anybody who is interested to do some playing with the data, we didn't mention that we also have a forecasting game called Fredcast. And if you have a user account, if you have a user account, you also have access to Fredcast. And what it is users can be part of a public league, and they can set up their own leagues, and they can create forecasts for 4 economic indicators. They can forecast unemployment rate, GDP, payroll employments, and inflation as a CPI growth. And every month, the score gets calculated, and then you're ranked among other people playing, and you can see how good you have scored and what your average error is towards other players.
You earn public recognition and also earn badges. So it's pretty fun.
I'm all about the badge. I was a Boy Scout, so I had lots of badges.
That's amazing. I'm so glad you brought that up. Maria, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Just go in there and search for whether it's your topic that you're interested, or the region in the country or the world that you're interested in, and see what you can find. Yeah, there's lots of different ways to search for data in Fred. Right under the big search bar and in the middle, there's also a release calendar, so you can see what data releases are scheduled to be released today or this week. And then you can also search by category. So that's kind of all of the data in Fred are grouped into different categories, and that's also a good way, if you're interested in a particular topic, to kind of go down the different breakdowns of the data.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And like I said, we're definitely fans, so keep up the good work.
Thank you for listening to the Data Driven Real Estate Podcast. You can find show notes and links to some of the resources mentioned in the show at datadrivenrealestate.com. Click that Join the Community, and you'll be forwarded to the Property Radar community, where you can ask questions about the current show and even see upcoming guests and ask questions there. We'd love to engage with you in the community, so check it out. Please don't forget to like, favorite, subscribe, and share on your favorite platform where you're listening to the show. It helps us out a great deal. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.